We were just asking, I said, where did you get that picture from? Oh, Professor Ademola Abbas joins us next, the global affairs expert. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
But a lot has since changed since that picture.
As we can see. But you know, but unfortunately, it would seem like not much has changed, you know, in our affairs, you know, in the country. You have spoken about so many things, you know, over time, every time we have had you, you know, whether virtually or on site here in the studio. Between then and now, and against the background of this conversation that you just saw on the television, what is your take? How optimistic are you that some of those ideologies that you propounded are even seeing any hopes anywhere?
Thank you very much, Ayo, and Chamberlain. Thanks for having me. Nice seeing you guys again. Look, number one, well, as Professor Utomi said earlier on, and the other speaker, let's take some joy in at least people coming together and talking, even if just over a year to go in this government. But unfortunately, you get tired of talking. You get a bit jaded. You get a bit pessimistic because we've had this many talks over time and time again. The question is, what comes out of them? It's a very important question. That from where we were coming to now, what has changed? Not a lot, unfortunately. No matter how optimistic one wants to be, you just have to be realistic about Nigerian situation. I mean, look, we're not dead. Let's get that clear. We're not extinct. But if we are not careful, I think we are inching our way towards a much larger disaster, in so many ways. You know, ministerial retreat, they're talking about what we need to do and this and that. Look at the background. People are talking about debt to GDP ratio and this and that is still okay for us and so on and so forth. But is this the kind of conversation we should be having in 21st century? This government has been in power for over 6 years now. If I'm right, in about 17, 16 months, it should be over. And they're still talking about fulfilling their election campaigns. I don't know which part of it they want to fulfill, whether it's the economic part, whether it's the security part, and so many other parts that have been left almost completely unattended to. So, well, on the one hand, as I said, one feels, okay, at least if to fulfill our righteousness, let's come together and do a bit of review. But where we are going to from here is pretty dicey.
You know, I looked at one United Nations Conference on Trade and Development report in 2006. Yes. And then they said, one of the ways, in fact, it is one of the only ways to reduce poverty or eliminate it is through human capacity development. We know that different states, time and again, they have this investment summit and things like that. And we look to the ivory towers as well to give us, you know, the kind of personnel that will be there to run these economies. But we've heard some of these states also say, look, in spite of all of those summits that we've held, when these opportunities come and the jobs are there, we have a challenge. The human capacity. So how do we reconcile some of these things? Is that a present danger, or, you know, we're making a mountain out of a molehill?
Well, thanks, Chamberlain. That's a very important question. Because, look, human capital is the most strategic capital any nation could have. Unfortunately, the biggest tragedy for Nigeria is that we have held on tenaciously to natural resources as our strategic capital. It's going to dry up. Natural resources, I mean, if projections are correct, by 2052, our oil should have totally dried up at that point in time. So then what do we fall back upon? That is part of the problem. And to me, and that is the organic problem, is the fact that we have completely left human capital undeveloped. And that is why we are describing. Look, ask yourself a question. How come, and I'm happy Professor Utomi alluded to Singapore. Many people have alluded to Singapore. Yeah. That's a country with almost nothing. You know, but by the leadership focusing on developing human capital, they were able to get everything they needed for the country. And they did it was a deliberate step. And that is the point. We don't take deliberate steps. Deliberate steps are not sitting and just talking and coming out with policy statements that will go nowhere. I was part of a government before. I know the way these things operate. You can have the finest ideas in your head. But at the end of the day, if somebody at the helms does not take charge, you can sit down, you can take all your, people in your department or ministry or agency, you can take them on retreat And many of them are just fancy retreats. I'm even happy this is happening in Nigeria. It's not in Dubai. They're fancy retreats. Let's go to Ghana. Let's go to Dubai. How many times do you see Ghanaians even come here anyway to come and do their own retreat? But the point, the tragedy for us is that we are not developing human capital. There's a huge flight from Nigeria. Nigeria is the country where you have a minister in charge of employment telling you, oh, we have so many doctors, so it's okay, we can lose a few to other countries. We are in a situation now where we are producing people. Nigerian students are consciously going to school now to go and study for courses that will be useful to Canada, courses to be useful to the UK, and to other countries that are serious. You and I saw what happened about 2 weeks ago, which is still ongoing in the United Kingdom. Yeah. Where because of some miscalculations, let's say, for lack of better words, they were hit in the face by, markets were getting empty, fuel, gas stations were getting, there were queues and so on. But you could see the interim measure quickly. But that is what happens when you fail to develop a human capital. I am not saying that UK doesn't develop, but at the end of the day, look, you have to break it down. Look at Nigeria today. If you are building a house, you have to rely on people from Togo, Benin Republic to do your tiles or this. Because why? An average Nigerian artisan wants to just go and get Okada and go and make quick money. So it's in formal economy, it's an informal economy. In the formal economy, look at it. When I was graduating from the university, in those days in Lagos, 1995, if people studied Yoruba, went and studied MBA as a second degree, because at that point in time, MBA was the most thing you could make money on. Everybody jumped. Before they finished that, then we began to have Oracle, C++, and everything. Because there is a dearth of the leadership taking a strategic step. It is left to people to figure out what they should do that will make them marketable. But the danger in that is that it is always short term.
Yeah, but sorry, how do we, because I mean, time and again you think, because if you look at other climes, when certain challenges come up in society, they look to the ivory tower.
Yep.
They expect solutions from there. But here, I don't know if we can say the same thing. So is the challenge also eroding that aspect of our society as well?
Well, I'm getting a bit slow in answering that question because that is my primary constituency. But look, let's be honest. This is national television. The Nigerian leadership, political leadership, has a nearly contemptuous, difference to the ivory tower. Nobody treats their intellectuals the way Nigerian governments treat their academics, their intellectuals. To start with, look, a professor in Nigeria is earning 450,000 naira a month. So what kind of research do you expect from that kind of institution? And number two, and I'm happy when Professor Utomi was speaking earlier on, it drew a very important and fundamental link between Mao Zedong's government in China and Deng, who came after him. Mao Zedong went after intellectuals. He didn't really respect them as much. And look at where landed China. But when Deng came, Deng rebuilt that, recognized the fact that, look, you needed these people to be able to rebuild a strong country.
Yeah.
Not too far. Israel was probably the only country that invited an intellectual, Albert Einstein, to come and become the president on the sheer strength of his ingenuity, his academic brilliance. And of course, a true academic said, you know what, I have nothing to do with governance. I cannot be your president. But in Nigeria, how do we treat intellectuals? We see them as enemies of the state, point blank, because you speak the truth. I could watch Professor Tomi almost sort of exploding when he was talking, and you could not but understand the level of frustration that people like him will feel in this kind of system. Because we denigrate academics. Look at our institution. Look at our education sector. We churn out graduates who come out and have no jobs, who are ill-baked, to be honest with you. They are half-baked. They are ill-baked. Look at our university system. Everything has all but, to be honest with you, all but collapsed. Practically.
Well, Prof, the academics have been part of the system for decades. I mean, many of the policies that we have always come from the academics. There are those who would always reference SAP and some other, policies of government like that from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s. Many of the national development plans that we have had, education policies, they always come from academics. So I'm wondering where that perspective is coming. I could almost say that whether or not we have human capital and human capacity development, it falls to the academics. So at what point did we begin to denigrate the academics, who themselves have always been and are always part of the system anyway?
That's a very important question. Look, by no means am I, lionizing the academia at all, or demonizing the political class. No, I'm looking at their interaction. You're an academic here. You may have the most brilliant ideas, and I've been there before. You come, you project. Yes, academics can sit and project SAP and say, look, let's go for SAP, let's go for this and this and that. But don't forget, they don't implement.
But we have had academics as chief executives of states.
No doubt about that. I mean, far few in between. The fact that you are a professor or you are a PhD holder, you are this, doesn't, and we confuse that in Nigeria. There's a difference between brilliance and intelligence. There's a difference between being an academic and being an intellectual. They're different things entirely. What I'm talking about is that how seriously do we take projections coming from the Ivy Tower? Look at a country like the United States, for instance. It doesn't mean that every single thing that an academic says is a holy grail. No. The second speaker who came after, Professor told me, I remember said something that sometimes these things take long term. Academics might make projections. They might say, look, let's go this particular direction. It doesn't mean that there's a quick fix. But sometimes, and I don't need to name names, there have been leaders in this country who deliberately went after some academics so that they could destroy their reputation. So they put them in positions and tell the country, look, we respect what you are saying. We put you in position, but then as soon as they put them there, they take away from them every single resource that they need to function. I'll give you a practical example. I will remember very, very well when Tai Sholari was the head of People's Bank of Nigeria. When he was invited by IBB or Bangeda then, I remember the first person he went to was Professor Aluko. What does IBB want with me? I'm not an economist. And to call the story short, he became the head of People's Bank. And I remember very well that he went and he published names of people, you must still remember that episode, people who were undermining that bank at that point in time. If I remember, Alhaji Baba Alhaji was the Secretary of State, who came out and said, Tai Sholari thinks Mayflower is, that People's Bank is Mayflower Squeak, and where he can punish people and get away with it. That is the point I'm trying to make here, is when you have an academic in position who is trying to do something that they believe is right, and I'm not saying they're always right, what is the approach of the government? What is the intention of a government, of a leader that puts you there in power as an academic, that puts you in charge, excuse me, that puts you in charge to be able to drive things? But don't let's focus only on academia. It goes beyond that. It goes to the quality of education we are even developing in our institutions, whether it's primary school, it's secondary school, it's universities.
Which also, my apologies, Prof, for buttoning, which also leads to the issue of this human capacity development that we're talking about. Because, there are those who allude to the fact that our education policy is not competent to give us the next generation. And if it essentially says that we are taking a deliberate action to not develop our human capacity or human capital.
Look, if an education you just mentioned is just one aspect of it, I'm going to come to the other side with that vocational training and stuff like that. But look at education to start with. What kind of university system are we running? What kind of secondary school system are we running? One of the finest academic programs that I ever intended to, and many of us did in Nigeria, I think in the 90s, was advanced levels, A-levels. You finished A-levels in those days, you went straight to year 2 in a university. And by the time I finished A-levels, I knew who I could compete with anywhere in the world. Let me give you an example. And I'm just saying this for analysis purpose. I finished A-level with 15 points. If you are familiar with A-level, that was ABA with an A extra, which means you probably had the highest point in the country then. The only person who would have beaten me was somebody who would score triple A's with a bonus making 16 points. And I doubt if there was in my generation. I had 15 points. My state didn't even know I existed. Never mind, when I went to study in University of Lagos law, I went in with 15 points. And students from certain parts of this country came in with 5, 6, 7, 8 points. They were on scholarship. I never got scholarship. We're in the same country. So human capital is, you're talking about developing, the competence, the resources of an employee, basically, of a particular company. Now, you failed me with my 15 points, struggle, no scholarship, nothing. I went through the same system with somebody who would just say, because you came from ABC state, going with 4 points and you have all the scholarship. How marketable are we? How can those people compete? How can a country say you're developing a sustainable human capacity when your internal policy makes such fundamental flaws? You might call it any names. You might call it federal character. You know, the idea in the short term, yes, you can use federal character to think, to bridge some gaps you imagine they are there. But in the long run, you are doing a lasting damage to the entirety of the country itself. Because if you come from state A with a 4 points, you study with me with a 15 point from state B, and we are gunning for the same jobs, then there's a problem. And if they still apply that, which is what is happening in Nigeria today, at the national level, they then put somebody in with that 4 point. What do you get? 1, 2. Look at national level. Nigeria is about the only country in my research that I know that submit the names of ministers to National Assembly to clear without allocating portfolios to them. I was a member of cabinet in Lagos State. I appeared before the State Assembly to be cleared for that post without knowing what position I'm going to be running. Nobody does that in the world. So you are a minister, you are appearing before the Senate to be cleared. What are they clearing you for? What questions are they asking you? No, the myth is that whereas a minister can function in any particular role. That is not the issue.
Let me link this with that, because, I mean, they say a lot rises and falls with leadership.
Precisely.
And if we don't get the right set of people in certain positions, all of these policies that we think will move us right will just be going south.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a stint with that in politics. Where do you think we're actually getting it wrong?
Chamberlain, I'll just give you an example now, and I'm happy you latched on that. So if I was appointed as a commissioner or a minister, without anybody asking me questions about my competence in the state or national assembly, because I haven't got my portfolio then, and I get in, the first thing in my mind is that whatever portfolio you're allocating to me has no bearing at the end of the day to the questions I've been asked for. Nobody gives a toss at that point in time about my capability to function in that particular ministry. So if I don't have that fathom, I cannot begin to promote values. I can't begin to promote policies that will make sure that students are given the kind of education that will feed directly into the workforce. Because at the national level, I have not even got that into my sensibility at all. You know, so we need to take a step back as a nation to say, look, what kind of policies are we churning out? And who are developing these policies? You know, and look, let's be honest with you. You know, I've had a lot of our youth being, you know, youth empowerment, bringing you to come and implement, developing this for the youth. Who will implement it? People who are calling themselves youths in Nigeria, some of them are 70-year-old. We have people who have been in government for the past 35, 40 years. And I was listening to Prof told me when he was saying anybody who has been in government for more than 12 years, you are a parasite. Well, that is the point. The kind of, look, anybody who is in any political party in Nigeria today, who goes to bed as a member of Party A and wakes up as a member of Party B can never generate the kind of policies that will take Nigeria out of this doldrum. It's simple. If you say somebody is a Republican in the US, you knew automatically then the values they stand for. Yeah. They don't believe in abortion, they don't do this, they don't believe in homosexuality, and so many other things. Those are your personal values. Your personal values animate your party. So you cannot wake up one day and simply say, you are now a Democrat. Something must be wrong with you.
But how do we, how do we get it right? Because if you look at our present reality, the kind of democracy we run, yeah, it has to be numbers. If you get in there, you get the most votes, you win. Now, the kind of people who could vote for you could be thugs.
Yeah.
There could be people who know next to nothing about what you're talking about. So if you induce certain quarters, they could influence your getting into office. Now, if a quote-unquote an ideal person for a certain position comes up to vie for those kind of positions, he has to have the resources.
That's right.
The wherewithal to get into those places. And the system, you need to understand how all of that play. To play the system, if I could say that, and then win. Can that actually happen to someone who is well-intentioned?
Oh, definitely. That's why it's straight away yes. It can because, as you said, you haven't got the resources. You remember when we talk about the electoral reforms and this and that, they moved what you need to register now to be able to, from 250 to 1 billion and this and that, and all this horrendous amount of money. Look, as far as I'm concerned, as a nation, we are full of a bunch of unserious people, including myself. When we are serious about the progress of Nigeria, we know what to do. I'm sorry to say, all these retreats here and these are jamborees. They don't lead anywhere. As I said, well, let's sit down and talk and this and that. But somebody must take look, it's deliberate actions you use to move countries forward. When Singapore was going to move forward through human capital development, it took a decisive action. What action? They set up a tripartite regime. Now, Professor Otomi referred to tripartite during the Aga Khan, which was different. That was between the public sector, private sector, and the government. Singapore was different. Singapore did the tripartite between the employer, the union, and the government. And they set up SDF, what they call a skill development fund, which was contributed to, actually, by employees, which they used to train employees. It was a deliberate, a decisive step that was taken. Those are things that we are missing in this country. Nobody takes such a decisive step. I'm sorry to say, after this meeting now, nothing will come out of it. Look, we are in October now. Anybody thinking the 17 months remaining for Buhari to leave government, you're just wasting your time.
Prof.
By the time you get to next year, January, February, we are already in a full swing election. Forget it. Nothing will be done after that.
Prof, you have said that we should have a little bit of hope, even though hope is not a strategy.
That's right.
It's 21 years into the Fourth Republic. No, 22 years.
22 years.
In another 20 years, I don't think it'll be wise to still be having the same conversation here and now at the same state. If anything will move, if any development will happen, and let's be frank, the 13-year-old today in another 20 years is going to be 33. So essentially, we are planning these 13-year-olds next 20 years. The 15-year-old is going to be what? 35. The 20-year-old is going to be 40. So what must we do now? Because these young people are there, according to Professor, 75% of them are under 35 in Nigeria. What must we do today in order to ensure that the life of the 20-year-old, by the time the person is 40, is not going through the same hassle the 40-year-old today is going through?
I wish I had a crystal ball that I could just chain and just give you a such one, just single silver bullet answer. But look, reform. Reform is very important.
Reform what?
I'm coming there. Reform is very important, but we have to be selective and deliberate in what we are reforming. Our education system needs reform. 25 years ago, you went to Polytechnic, you went to technical colleges, and you came out, you were proud. You were able to function very, very well. You didn't need to go to university if you couldn't go to university. That was why those cadres were also developed, so they could develop vocational skills and this and that. I remember very well. I had an aunt that attended Teacher Training College, TTC. They were very, very effective in those days in teaching teachers. You know, not nowadays that people actually go to a university and they come out, they do. What the kind of reform we need, look, take a step back in 1995. UAE, Qatar, Lebanon, and Oman took a deliberate step to reform. Number one, they began with the education system. They target primary and secondary because that is feed into different markets. They went to higher institutions. They moved beyond that. You also need market reform. The largest employer of the public sector in Nigeria today is government. You know why? Because as we say in Yoruba land, we say, Ogota, which means whether I do or not do, I will get my salary. The mentality of most public sector workers, especially government, which is the largest employer, is that, you're just there, you're just marking time. Basically, they get paid, and you have to kill the governor's mother for you to get sacked once you get elected, get recruited into the public sector. So you need that kind of, our education system needs to be reformed completely. Number two, as I said, you need market orientation, market reform. Then number three, you need to reform. I mean, I'm happy, I think you mentioned national ethos. Yeah. And I was very happy when I heard that said. Look, and I'm happy also with the part you told me to respond that who will drive it. In 1979, Shagari government came with, don't forget, ethical revolution. A government that said it was serious about ethical revolution was the same government where its stalwarts, Akinjide Akinloye and Co, were on an air from London to Nigeria, and they spent 150 million naira on gambling on a 6-hour flight with our national money. And you are talking about promoting ethical revolution. So look, we cannot just be talking about these things as highfalutin. They are not brooding omnipotence in the sky. They are things that must be applied here on ground. So when you see lack of sincerity on part of the government, then what are we talking about? I'm sure you saw a viral video about a young Nigerian who was admitted to India about 3-4 days ago and had problem clearing. I'm a member of a particular platform. I don't need to mention the platform. They actually stepped in and had to call the governor of the state and intervened and called Marwa and got that problem solved. That guy was lucky. Because members of that platform could do that, right? What about millions of other Nigerians who don't have the same? So this is something that we have to focus on.
Yeah, and it's an ever-growing concern, so we'll always keep harping on some of these matters because we have a country to build. And we just have to make sure that that is done. We always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Professor Ademola Abbas is a global affairs expert and lawyer.